You're listening to All Art is Quite Useless, where a group of mates chat about art. We talk about music, literature, films, paintings, and everything in between.
The podcast is also brought to you by Cavity Magazine, a magazine dedicated to bringing you the latest developments from the front lines of online writing. Find us on Twitter at Cavity Magazine and submit today.
Alternatively, you can get in touch by emailing at submissionscavmag@gmail.com. submissionscavmag@gmail.com.
All art is quite useless.
Quite silly this week, and we all lost our minds a little bit towards the conversation in a fairly good way. But while editing this one, I wasn't sure whether it's worth keeping in a bit where we all lose our minds and laugh a lot. So I've kept that out of the general conversation, but upon listening back, I thought it is quite funny, and I laughed a lot listening back to that conversation. So if you stay tuned to the very end, you will find us losing our minds, and I hope that you get some sort of enjoyment out of that as well. So hang on till the bitter, bitter end. This week's topic, as picked by Jamie last episode, is Brian Eno's 1975 album Another Green World. Do listen if you wish to have some more frames of reference as to what on earth we're talking about, and we do also go quite in depth on the Arena documentary also titled Another Green World, which you can find on YouTube. Enjoy!
For this podcast, I have picked Another Green World by Brian Eno. It was his third solo studio album, and it was recorded in 1975. Just for a little bit of context, if you're not familiar with Brian Eno, I know we're all here to different degrees a fan of his work. But he started off, I think it was the early 70s, with Roxy, they were a glam rock band. And it was after their second album, I think. I'm not sure about that. Louis, can you?
It might have been. I always thought it was the first, but it might have been the second one. I'm not as well read on my Roxy music as I should be. I just know the first album well.
Okay, but yeah, so he left, and for the first three, essentially made kind of quite similar glam rock music to what he was making in Roxy, and then at some point he got into a car accident, I believe, and from that he was left bedbound for a few weeks. And during that period, his girlfriend at the time bought him some 18th century harp music that she put on next to his bedside, but put it on very low volume. And because he was bedbound, he wasn't able to change the volume control, and the window was open, so he was getting quite a lot of the outside noise coming in as well. And it was from there that the whole ambient thing kind of started. That's where he got the idea from. Interestingly, before the album we'll talk about today, before Another Green World, he recorded an album called Discreet Music that came out afterwards, that was pretty much his first full ambient record, but wouldn't come out afterwards, and he wouldn't coin the term until releasing Ambient 1 a couple of years after. But yeah, I just mainly picked this album because I really like it. I mean, he's a really interesting artist, even outside of music, kind of the stuff he's done with installations and light work and all of that kind of thing is also really fascinating. And a lot of the techniques that he employed to record this album, I think, would make a good conversation. But yeah, for the most part, I just kind of think this is a perfect album, and I really like it.
I really like it too.
Agreed. I think it is near on perfect.
I also really liked it.
I'm glad. Well, that awkwardness is out of the way now.
I'd always known that Jamie likes it, and he knows that I like Eno, and I think I did loosely know that Liv quite likes Eno, and I think I discussed the ambient stuff with Jack before, but I've never chatted to him about like his singy stuff, because there's that kind of harsh divide between ambient Eno and then sort of glam rock Eno, which is something I was chatting to my dad about this the past few days after saying to him that we're going to be discussing this album, and he was like, oh yeah, but that's one of his singy ones, I don't really like his singy stuff. And I was like, what are you on about? Like, I'll Come Running is just like a beautiful song, and he's got like a strange Teutonic strange voice. I said strange twice then. And I think because I had it on around the house so much, I think hearing it as many times as I did, he's now been won round to thinking, actually, Brian Eno's voice is really quite good. Which I like. I like that he's changed his opinion on it.
Yeah, it was interesting for me with this record because I had listened to, I knew I'll Come Running, that was on my playlist currently actually already, so obviously like that song, but my initial introduction to Eno was purely his ambient stuff, and I think that's how most people get into him nowadays. And when I found out he did all the more poppy tracks, I was just, surprised.
So, yeah, my experience with Eno is obviously... Well, I was first introduced to him via Noel Fielding and his Luxury Comedy, where he's referenced in competition. It's a competition between the two greatest Brians, Brian Eno versus Brian Ferry.
And do you know what? That never even crossed my mind that they're both called Brian. How have I only just noticed that? They were in the same band together?
Yeah, I was going to say that he was frontman for Roxy, wasn't he?
It's a bit like how Superman's mum and Batman's mum are both called Martha.
It is wild, yeah. Hope someone got fired for that blunder. So I got into Brian Eno when I was getting into ambient music. I first sort of came across proper ambient music about a year and a half ago when I was like looking for music to just switch off and study to at uni, and on all the ambient playlists on YouTube and Spotify, Brian Eno was at the very top, and I heard I remembered his name from that Noel Fielding sketch, so I picked it up and never really looked back, because I think it's probably about as fine as fine ambient artist as you can really get, isn't it?
Yeah.
He's just amazing, and every time I listen to like music for airports, it's like being at the airport of my dreams.
It is otherworldly, isn't it?
Yeah, it's so otherworldly and so just like intensely creative, and even though ambient music is so detached from like an ego, you can still really like tell that Brian Eno is like a full auteur on that, you know. But how that I suppose that kind of impacted my my viewing of, well, my listening experience of this album, because I definitely prefer the second half of the album to the first half, because that's where it gets a bit more Brian Eno ambient style rather than the Roxy style, which I never really cared for glam rock particularly. I do quite like his the first part of the album though. I just really fell in love with the second part. But the first part reminded me quite a lot of the Village Green, the Kinks.
Yeah,
that's a really
good comparison.
Oh yeah.
It's funny, Jack, you say that, because I came out of this sort of revisited this album, also really enjoying the second half in a way that I'd never quite enjoyed it before. I don't know why, some of the songs felt so fresh to me this time on the second half of it. Particularly, I guess we'll go through our favourite tracks, but the one that, when I had my headphones on the other day listening to it, the one that just caught me really off guard is called Zavanol/Lava. That track, just, I don't know, it feels like a bit of a precursor to Ambient 1. Like the piano sound is so similar to Ambient 1, but it's just got this sort of, it's this really mournful sound to it. And you can hear like the sounds of like kids playing. It sounds like at a swimming pool or something, so drenched in reverb.
Yeah.
And I don't know why, it just made me feel so bitterly sad when listening to it in a really nice way. I don't know. It's a strange thing to like to feel really happily sad, but I just listened to it. It just completely enveloped me.
Would you say it felt a little bit like staring at high windows?
Yeah.
Because I'm not trying to be not trying to be facetious, but it genuinely did remind me of that Philip Larkin poem.
Really?
Yeah, in certain parts, because I think the power of like long drawn out ambient music is either creating a sense of very floaty sort of acceptance, like what Brian Eno says in the documentary. He says music takes you to a different place, and like you can feel the temperature, and you can see the place that you're in from a good piece of music. And I felt that transcendentalism with the second part of this album, or the album as a whole, really, and like that poem as well, High Windows by Philip Larkin.
Yeah.
Just as a side.
It's interesting you say that, because the way I view the High Windows and the Winter Palace poems is that they kind of fold outwards, like those concepts of, you know, these great big expanses. And I think that's similar to this album in the way it approaches music. It's not linear. It's more, you know, you go in and out of places and you visit different avenues, but not necessarily in a straight line.
Yeah, it's quite like it's almost four-dimensional, isn't it?
Yeah.
Sort of going through all these different elements of space, and then feels like you're going through time at certain parts as well.
That's the stuff that's kind of always drawn me to Eno's work as well, because like you, Jet, my first kind of a bit of exposure to him was through Music for Airports, and especially on that album and on the second half of this one and a few tracks on the first half, there's so much space in his music, but it doesn't feel empty. It feels like, you know, he uses everything minimally, and to have literally just some synths and a piano line looping for 12 minutes or whatever there is on Ambient 1, and in these ones only 3 or 4 minutes, so it's not as long, but to have such bare instrumentation but to create that kind of feeling within it is what's always really impressive about it.
It's one of the things that this album, I think, if you did a bad job, you could use it as a stick to beat him with. But it does sort of flip from really sparse music to quite busy music really seamlessly.
Yeah.
And the two never feel like they clash against each other. Like that track I said, Zavanol Lava, it's just like piano notes and ambient sound.
It definitely sounds like a precursor to Music for Airports.
Yeah, for sure. And then you hear a track like St Elmo's Fire, which is so mad and busy.
Yeah, it's quite
it said in that
chaotic,
Another Green World documentary that he wanted Robert Fripp to play that solo, like is it like an electronic radar receiver or something? He said, "Oh, give me crazy noises," and he bloody does. Like the guitar playing on this album is sick. Like Robert Fripp is the boy. He is bae. I stan Robert Fripp, honestly.
You have to stan.
This is Robert Fripp of King Crimson fame.
King Crimson, yeah.
Did you say Babu Frick?
Babu Frick, King Crimson.
Robert Frick. I find it interesting that quite a lot of the guest instrumentation on this album are all prog rockers. Like it's Robert Fripp, and also I know that Phil Collins plays drums on a couple of the tracks. He plays on Skysoul, which I didn't know until I looked it up afterwards, but I do remember thinking kind of on the first listen in preparation for this that the drumming on that is so strange. It's like so sporadic.
Yeah.
Considering so many of the tracks here don't have any percussion at all, when it is used, he does it in such a strange way.
Yeah, definitely. I thought with those opening tracks, like there's so many different genres that you can sort of pull out of the album, and I think it's definitely an album of two two halves, like you were saying, Jack. But those first few tracks, I was getting so much jazz vibes. Like there's that little twang of the riff that is coming through. It sounds so jazzy to me, but then the album really departs from that later on.
Yeah, definitely. Sounds like double bass in parts as well, doesn't it?
Yeah, I didn't want to say it was a double bass, but I was definitely thinking it.
I don't know if it is.
No.
Definitely sounds like it though. It might have fretless bass is played on one.
Yeah.
But I was actually going to say that freestyle bass feeling reminded me a bit of Les Claypool, the way he uses his bass guitar as like a drum essentially. Because I've heard it said that bass guitars are essentially percussion. You know, they're not.
They're part of the rhythm section, yeah.
Yeah. But if some tracks, especially early on, that you say live with the jazz sound, it sounds like someone's just hitting the shit out of a bass guitar.
Yeah.
In a really good way. Like, yeah, it sounds awesome.
Yeah.
That might have come from the fact that kind of outside of the inception of some of like the more minimal ambient stuff being from his accident, the other thing I know just through seeing documentaries with him that he was really interested in was African music, and in particularly Fela Kuti was a big touch point for him.
All right.
Yeah, which I think is maybe why a lot of the grooves on this record are the way that they are.
Well, you hear that most when he teamed up with Talking Heads. That is when they went full on Fela. And like, if you watch the Stop Making Sense film of the Talking Heads live concert, it's just like, oh, that's what Fela Kuti was doing. There's just those guys have brought it to a Western audience, like that huge big band feel. And yeah, that's a good comparison, isn't it? The Fela Kuti one, because it was also just a bit of a maverick sort of outsider, and didn't really give a crap what anyone sort of thought of what he did. Do you know what I mean? Like going from a glam rock band, this is Brian Eno again now, going from a really successful glam rock band, like they were super successful, especially at the time when he left.
I was going to say, and they continue to be after.
To go off and just do your own thing, but it's nowhere near as glam as what Roxy Music was. It's all kind of weird introverted little songs that he sort of does. Do you know what I mean? Like, I'll come running to tie your shoe.
Yeah.
The lyrics in that song are so insular, and
It's like going from being a rapper to a librarian.
it is a bit. Well, he was an icon at that point. He was like, there's a really funny bit. Did you see that in the Another Green World Arena documentary? Where it's like, is it true that Brian Ferry was annoyed that he got more girls than him? And he's like, well, I don't know if he was annoyed.
Yeah.
You'd have to ask him. But did you? Yes, I did.
I love like how really it's just about him as a person. I love how really like childlike he is. Do you know what I mean? He's got a very like childlike spirit. And he gets really excited about everything that he does.
He's one of the few people that I look at. He's been going for as long as he has in the industry, that you think he still so much enjoys what he does.
Yeah.
And you can tell, like, when he sat in his studio, you just think that is him at his happiest. Is sat in there doing something brand spanking new. I got the sense from that documentary as well. It talks about how he produced for U2 and Coldplay. I just got the sense that he didn't really care that much about working with them. I got that vibe.
Yeah. In a way, when I was doing research for this album, obviously, and I saw all these photos of him in the 70s, like with the Roxy, whatever it's called, Roxy Music, I almost felt kind of betrayed from the Brian Eno I know and love. I was like, oh, so that's how you started. You're a glam rocker, okay. Wasn't expecting that.
Yeah, he used to be super androgynous.
Yeah, I guess that was just like the times, you know, if you're involved in music in a certain group, you probably would just be like that. But it's just obviously worlds apart from what he's doing now. But this album in particular is so timeless. I think when I was listening to it and then I saw the date, I was like so shocked it was 75.
Yeah, me too.
Ambient sound.
What is your father's name?
Ambient sound.
Your mother's name is what?
Ambient sound.
And her maiden name was?
Ambient sound.
What is your favorite word?
Ambient sound.
What turns you on?
Ambient sound.
What turns you off?
Ambient sound.
What sound or noise do you love?
Ambient sound.
What sound or noise do you hate?
Ambient sound.
What is your favorite curse word?
Ambient sound.
What profession other than your own would you like to attempt?
Ambient sound.
What profession would you not like to attempt?
Ambient sound. There does come a point in a lot of like young adults' life, I feel like, when they discover this album. I very vividly remember the day, because my family used to run a cafe, so my brother and I would put on all sorts of albums out as the front of house. I remember he put this on for me, and I just couldn't believe what I was hearing. It sort of gets you thinking so much, and you think, "What? This is so strange," but it sounds like I've known it all my life.
Yeah.
And you think, even on a first listen, you think these songs cut straight to your core. He's got a strange knack for doing that, considering how odd and progressive his music was. Considering it was the same with Ambient One Music for Airports. I remember the first time I heard the first track on that. Every time I hear it, it feels like I'm hearing it for the first time. Yet also incredibly familiar.
I think that comes from, and it's interesting that your dad Louis said that he didn't like this as much at first because it was one of his more singy ones. But when he does use melody, which is he uses quite sparingly on this album, he's really good with the melody. Like for St. Elmo's Fire, and like we were talking earlier about I'll Come Running, the melodies on those are so strong, and they are those like kind of vocal hooks that you feel like you've heard before.
Yeah.
So that they're familiar, which is maybe sort of what cuts through the other strangeness on the album.
I read a really good quote while I was doing my research, and I thought it was so true. And the way, obviously, I think it was Jamie who was saying this earlier about the way the ambient tracks and the vocal ones are kind of like placed next to each other, which is quite bold, I think, musically. But the effect of it is like the quote says you're slipping into and out of sleep while friends talk in the next room. And it's so true. You're sort of
That's really
when
good.
you're listening to it, you blend into the ambient ones, and it becomes part of the surroundings. And then all of a sudden, you're like awakened by the more upbeat pop tracks.
Yeah, that's a beautiful quote.
I was reading earlier on, and this album was on the background, and it was about the 5th time I've listened to it because I've had it on repeat all day. And I earlier on I tried reading, and I was like somewhere near the first third of the album, and I couldn't concentrate at all because of the jarring like melodies and hooks and stuff, and the weird like jazz notes that were in it. But then I was reading it later on, and I was like somewhere down the bottom middle, and I didn't even notice. I like forgot it was on. I was like, oh yeah, I remember what it feels like to listen to ambient music. You just forget it's there, but you don't. It like somehow informs what you're doing.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it, more than most types of music, I guess that's kind of the beauty of Eno generally, is that you can get out of it whatever you're bringing to the table. I think it lends itself to so many different moods and ideas that I've listened to it, I think, 5 times since Jamie announced that we're going to talk about this next. I've listened to the album about 5 times, and each time I've come away with a new song really rooted in my head, thinking, oh, that's probably my favourite. And each time it changes.
I think it challenges you, doesn't it? Not in a challenging way, like like you know how the first time you listen to Death Grips is challenging.
Yeah.
It is, yeah.
It's like listening to like a broken washing machine on steroids.
But then it all makes
and
sense.
it's like, yeah, then it clicks. Well, like Brian Eno is like the opposite of that, where it's deceptively like simple and accessible, but then sort of once you get on that wave, it pushes you in seemingly endless tangents that go on. And
Yeah.
even with this album, because I say this album isn't obviously Music for Airports is ambient, and there's a lot of open space, and it's basically an infinite plane of you to explore. But this album is a lot more straightforward, and I mean, every track's like 3 minutes.
Yeah, it's
max.
a more pop record, isn't it?
It's definitely more poppy, but I would still think this is like an ambient album in the sense that it challenges your preconceived notions of what pop is.
Yeah.
And do you know what I mean?
Definitely.
I think what you said about the accessibility of it as well is what a lot of contemporaries saw in it at the time, because he goes from this to going to Berlin with Bowie, and Bowie, in my opinion, he sticks out his best material of his entire career in the time that he's working with Brian Eno. And then after Berlin, he goes to New York and hangs out with Talking Heads, and the Talking Heads put out their best output of their career with Brian Eno. And I think a lot of people recognise that he's got this brilliant production idea of being so accessible, yet also a real artist in the truest sense, that you can have your cake and eat it.
Yeah, definitely. He's like a creative Jesus.
Mm.
He kind of reminds me of the way Ezra Pound behaved in the early 20th century when he was meeting people like Yeats and T.S. Eliot, and he was acting as like a sounding board for all of their ideas. And they both Yeats and Eliot are fantastic poets, but some of their greatest work was produced with the editing help of Ezra Pound. I mean, The Wasteland was completely different to what it ended up as being, just because Ezra Pound chopped it up and told Eliot to stick to the changes that he made. And it's one of the best pieces of poetry of the 20th century. So there are those people who sort of become great in their own right and then make other people great, but they don't see a distinction between the two. Because I would argue that Brian Eno isn't like, he's definitely not an egotist, and he doesn't really care that his music is in the background, even like literally, and of the wider musical landscape. He's quite a kind of a background musician when you think about all the people he's actually worked with, like some like literally the biggest names in music. He's been in like fundamental in. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So obviously the creative world is just filled with these people who are actual geniuses and just manage to get exactly what they want. Exactly. Yeah, but what they want is just a net good. This was a nice podcast to do. It's filled me with a bit of hope for the arts and stuff, you know.
Yeah, it's one of those albums, like, even when you're looking at it from the outside with the album artwork, but obviously when you listen, that's how you really know, it just feels like a perfect album. And I've not even listened to it enough and grown to love it enough for it to be perfect to me, but just from the outside, like the composition, the production, the way the songs work together, it's very similar to some of my favourite albums, like The Strokes' Is This It?, Airplane Over the Sea. They just feel so complete as an album and just so well-rounded and perfect. And I think this is definitely going to be, the more I listen to it, I've listened to it probably 3 times, and I think the more I listen to it, the more that's going to be confirmed.
I also think it's blessed with album artwork, which is the perfect visual representation of how it sounds.
Yeah,
I love it.
adore
I
the
find that
album
so
artwork.
satisfying when that happens. There are
beautiful.
very few albums that do it for me, that I think, yeah, that's the perfect way to sum up what you're going to hear on this.
An album artwork is so underrated as a part of the album. Like, it's so easy to think of album artwork as being superficial, but I genuinely judge whether I'm going to listen to an album or not based on what it looks like.
Yeah,
I've
so
done
do
that
I.
before. Yeah, I've done that before as well.
Same with books. Like, you need a good book cover.
Yeah, you do. Old ones get a pass, but
My perfect example of an album with an album cover, which is exactly how it sounds, is My Bloody Valentine's Loveless. Just that
I wasn't
pink,
expecting that.
distorted image of the man holding a guitar, like the close. It just is. That is exactly how it sounds. It is a total sonic mess of an album, and that a sonic mess in a good way.
The Tame Impala album, the one where it's like the really trippy image. I think is it Lonerism? Inner Speaker. Yeah, I always get confused.
Yeah.
What?
That I think the album artwork is so representative of the album.
In any of your guys' research you came across the oblique strategy cards.
Yes.
Which was a technique that he used during the recording of this, which is super interesting.
They look
It
sick.
came up in the documentary, and I'd quite like to learn more about them because I think they're probably
Yeah, they
quite-
didn't really go into what they were in the documentary. They just assumed that if you're watching it, you're already an
No.
Eno stan, and that you know what they are.
So they're like these a pack of cards that he would have whilst he was working on something, and each of them would have a different instruction on. And throughout like his working day, when he was working on a track or whatever he was doing at the time, he'd pull one of these cards and have to follow the instructions. And they would say things like, I'm trying to think of some examples that I've heard before, but do what you're doing now at twice the speed, so work twice as fast. Or, because you could also take them however you felt. So if he read that and thought, oh, I need to play twice as fast, or, you know, double the speed of this track, he could do that as well. They'd also do things like disregard everything you've done, or
One of the ones that they showed on that documentary said, it said, "Do what you wouldn't do."
yeah,
right.
things like that. But half of their purpose is for him to evaluate what he's doing, because if he draws a card like disregard everything you've done, and he's like, oh, I really don't want to do that, then it kind of speaks to the quality of whatever he was doing at the time. Whereas if he draws it and thinks, I can chuck this track away, it probably wasn't worth working on in the first place.
Okay.
So a lot of them are kind of a guidance to this, and maybe that's why, I know we said earlier about it at times sounding quite sporadic, and there was instances where placing those ambient tracks next to more vocal poppy tracks seems like a strange choice, but it was something maybe that came out of that. And I think it's just such a interesting way of working, and it speaks so much to his mentality whenever he goes into making any kind of art, really, that he always looks at it from, or tries to look at it from, a different angle. And I think whether that's working with other people, be it Talking Heads or David Bowie, or implementing like these strategy cards throughout his work, he's never comfortable doing one thing, and that's probably not ever clearer than it is on this album.
I think that the oblique strategy cards, and yeah, you are absolutely right, Jamie. The way like his mentality and going to everything is just to be as just to try and be as creative as is possible, and to make like something that is as good as it possibly can be. There was a bit in the documentary where he was, I can't remember who was speaking to him, but he was talking about being Catholic, growing up Catholic, and leaving not believing when you grow up, but then still having a mentality that he calls being ardent, and it's like throwing all of your passion and your drive into whatever you're doing in your life that isn't your religion. And I kind of got I got that. I definitely can see that mental genealogy. It's like a psychological process that you go through, abandoning faith but having to pick up the mantle of art in place of it. It seems like he's as close to like a religious artist who isn't religious as you can be, if that makes sense.
Yeah, he seems like a very obsessive musician.
Yeah,
it reminded me of a way he approaches music. He calls himself a non-instrumentalist. So I'm guessing that means he doesn't play any instruments, but I don't actually know if that's true or not. But it reminded me...
He played keys in Roxy Music.
Oh, okay. Well, that's basically the same as not playing any instruments.
Whoa. Shots fired.
I'm joking.
Brian
I'm
Eno's
joking.
days in Roxy Music.
well, we stand all the keyboardists out there listening to this.
Yeah, we stand. Sorry.
I have to tell you, it's an amazing feeling to play a keyboard where every note behaves totally differently from every other.
Is that what was going on?
Yeah, let's listen. This is a scale of C. It's fantastic.
Would you say that he's like a synth? He's a synth person more than anything.
Oh yeah. He's a synth dude. He's about the progression of technology, I'd say, more than anything.
Yeah.
Like in that documentary, he talks extensively about algorithms and about new processes for which you can use science to make music.
Yeah.
That's what I mean by him coming off as someone who's like religiously artistic. You know what I mean?
Yeah, he seems like an obsessive.
Yeah, just going through the absolute like I can't imagine there's a single book he hasn't read that was written in the 20th century. Do you know what I mean? He's got he's got so much like knowledge in the way of like psychology and technological advancements on psychology and how that'll affect politics and all that stuff. He's definitely a thinker, you know. He doesn't shy away from the intellectual rigor that, I mean, in the documentary he says that like the artist's job is to draw attention to philosophical ideas of the time. I'm not entirely sure I agree with that, but he definitely thinks he's doing that. That seems to be the purpose of his music.
If it helps him do what he does, then sure.
yeah, definitely. I mean, I don't really, not sure I care all that much about cybernetics, but
it does go quite heavily into cybernetics, doesn't it? That documentary.
Yeah. There's a bit where he's talking about like one world government, and I was a bit like,
oh god,
Jack's triggered.
You're losing me a bit there, you know. But we'll brush past it.
To get a little bit more on track, a seemingly simple question, but favourite track?
You know, I was afraid of this question because I can't remember.
I always knew this question would come.
I think for me, I really like St. Elmo's Fire.
Same. That's my favourite.
Yeah, because I think that's got the kind of weirdness and some of the spaciness of the instrumentals, but at the same time, the pop melody that is more indicative of like his place with Roxy, and as a track, it's kind of reflective of what I like as the album as a whole. Is that it's somewhere in between those two stages of his artistic development, between making rock music in the early 70s that was more based on melody, and then going completely the opposite and being devoid of that and having like spacey, weird synths and instruments. It's kind of got both elements of that, which is what I really like about it.
Yeah, I just thought when I listened to it, I was like, wow, that it just sounds amazing. Like the way he's builds up the tension throughout. I thought it was you listen to it and I instantly connected with it in terms of my personal taste in music. And then I looked up the lyrics after, and they're sort of reflective of an adventure like these two people are having. And I think what he does so well on this album as a whole is he gets lyrics that seem to reflect so well the sound of that the song is making. And this whole song just sounds like an adventure, and obviously the lyrics match. But yeah, that was definitely my favourite. I think I'll listen to it a lot in the future.
It's the melody in it as well is pretty fucking banging, isn't it?
Yeah.
In that blue August moon. It's so good. I don't know. I don't know how my dad
Copyright.
was like, oh, I don't like his singing stuff. It's like, that's such a tune.
Yeah,
like,
I was
how
really
can it be like that.
I was really surprised you were saying that, because I think when he does use melody, he uses it massively.
He's brilliant.
Yeah, I don't think that you have to be in one camp or the other, but I certainly do have a preference. So I'd say my favourite track is probably Little Fishes.
While I hastily cue that track up.
Not for any. It's just got quite a lot of the nice dreamy.
Wow, that is a strange
elements.
track to have picked as your favourite. That's a really interesting one. Having given it a quick listen again, it's like, wow. Sorry, why that one?
I don't know. I'll be honest. I can't remember what it sounds like. I really struggle to like pin down which song is which. I just remember like how the second half sounds, and I like it more than the first half. So apologies to
It's a good tune. It's a club floor filler.
You just went and looked at the track list and picked the one you liked the sound of, didn't you?
I have listened to this album.
It's just plinky plonk synth noises. I might figure that track as you say it, so it gives a bit of context as to why we're all like, why that one?
Yeah, it's quite
Could play little clips.
Radiohead-esque. I thought I can see where they get a little bit influenced.
Wait, is it got Weird Fishes? There's a little bit.
Little Fishes.
There's a Radiohead track called Weird Fishes.
No, yeah, Weird Fishes on in Ravers.
Yeah.
Weird Fishes are preggy.
I was actually going to draw a comparison between this album and In Rainbows a little bit.
Go for it.
Yeah.
I think that both play around with melody and not. I wouldn't say there's a lot of ambient on In Rainbows, but there's certainly a lot of like techno influence. Not that it's a techno album, but it's, you know what I mean. It's just got that. I'm overusing the word a little bit, but it's got that kind of genealogy in it.
Yeah.
The album it made me think of the most was Aphex Twin's Ambient Selected Works 85 to 92, or Volume 1 it's called anyway. But I feel like after Eno, I think he's the guy that pushes that genre the most significantly after him.
Intelligent dance music,
exactly.
Wow.
Pretentious as that sounds,
That does sound very
people lining up for the sad rave. You know.
I love it. I love the ambient works.
Aphex Twin is why I'm crying in the club.
When April 14th comes on in Revolution de Cuba.
What did you guys make of some of like the darker tracks on this? I'm thinking particularly like In Dark Trees and Somber Reptiles.
Oh, Somber Reptiles is so good.
Both of which struck me as being. I mean, some of the other tracks on this album kind of have an underlying creep.
I can't remember what it sounds like.
Oh, for God's sake.
So Jack had like 6 Valiums and put on another green world. He landed on another green world.
Yeah, I'm sure it sounds good.
Mashed potato brain over here.
Just to another
like
green
listening
world
to it, and
once.
So my experience with this album was, I was listening to it. I listened to the first half. I was like checking back. I was like, "Yep, that's this one. That's this one. That's this one." And then it kind of like loses me. It didn't lose me. I kept listening to it. But I just forgot to keep checking which sounded like which, and it just all got very out of hand.
Well, that's the beauty of ambience. I think you listened to it in the way it was intended.
I think I did as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah, exactly.
I did really enjoy it. Should I give a shout out to what next week will be?
What's
Yes.
that coming over the hill? Is it a suggestion? Is it a suggestion?
You are right. It is a suggestion. Sorry, I couldn't remember who sang that song. I was going to say. So next week's podcast will be about a short story called Phil Undo, Abstract Horror Exterminator by Nick Land.
All right then.
Christ.
That's what
Nice
it will
one.
be about. So that's PHYL-UNDHU. Just type that in and it will come up. By Nick Land, Land.
Jamie, thank you for a brilliant suggestion.
Yeah, same.
Thanks, man.
Thank you for introducing me to that album.
You're welcome.
I'm definitely going to listen to this album lots more this week.
That's a good one.
Yeah, I think I'm going to love it a lot.
gonna be great.
It's going to be a repeated listen for me.
I think it would be quite funny. If we had a list of only the highest pantheon of art that is not useless.
What do you mean?
Oh, what, like an
Like a
overarching
recommended
list?
list, yeah.
Wait, out of
I
all our
feel-
episodes?
Therefore, it cannot be on this
What are you on
podcast.
about?
Yeah, and if, well, obviously we look at something each week, and our podcast is called All Art is Quite Useless. However, there are some pieces of art that are not useless, and
This
I think that
Is
I
Yeah.
feel like Another Green World is not useless.
This is quite
This be one of
useful.
them.
It's very useful.
I agree.
If only we showed it more respect.
So everything you just listened to is a lie and a sham.
Hey, you're still here. That's good. Congratulations on making it to the very, very end. You listened to our waffle for quite long enough. Thanks to Jamie for picking such a wonderful piece of art in the form of Brian Eno's Another Green World, determined to be a piece of art that is not useless. So cheers there. Jack's turn next week in the All Art is Quite Useless rota of suggestions. He's picked a short story by Nick Land called Phil Undu, spelt PHYL-UNDHU. We'll be posting a link to that in the description for this podcast. And if you haven't had enough of us yet, during the recording of this conversation, we had a bit of a weird moment where we all started to lose the plot in a rather funny way, I like to think. And partially my fault. I'd had a few beers and I'd been at work that day and just lost the plot a little bit. So I initially cut it out of the original conversation, but I don't know whether that was the right call or not. We all kind of determined in the end that it was quite funny and might be worth keeping, so I've decided to whack it in at the end as a little Brucey bonus. So here's us losing our minds, and do enjoy yourselves. Thank you very much, and love you as always. Oh, and do remember to hit us up on our Instagram, cavity_mag, on Twitter, @CavityMagazine, and if you don't fancy either of those, you can email us, submissionscavmag@gmail.com. Thank you very much. I'm going to go now. Bye. My favourite track on this, though, is probably either St Elmo's Fire, you know, go with the crowd.
A resounding favourite.
The guitar sounds on that are just honestly, I can't go on about how much I love Robert Fripp's guitar playing on that song. It's just nuts. Or my traditional favourite of this album has always been the track. It's the eponymous track, Another Green World. It's always done things
I really
to
like
me,
that
that
track
song.
as well.
Especially because it just fades in and out. It's only a minute.
Yeah, it's a great way to round off the first half of the album. It definitely feels like a closer to that, and then you kind of go into a darker, more ambient thing in the second half.
I think it. Oh yeah, it does close off the first half. You're right.
Yeah, it closes
on the
the first
vinyl,
half, and then
that's the last track.
Somber Reptiles opens the second half.
Yeah,
I'm
it
sure
just
it sounds amazing.
And it is the it's the theme for BBC Arena documentaries as well. So it always it's a good thinking music. I remember when I was in second year at uni, and I had just too much time on my hands and a lot of Eno obsession to deal with. I tried to desperately rip off that track, Another Green World. I'm gonna have to try and find it. I don't know whatever happened to it. It might have got lost with my stolen laptop.
Yeah,
in
you
Hungary.
need to use that on this podcast.
But if I can find it, I'll try and use it. It is such a shoddy Eno imitation, but I was just like, yeah, I can do it. I can do what he does.
I am Eno now.
It's just bleeps and bleeps, isn't it?
I am Eno.
Look at me. I am Eno.
Yeah, it is just honestly that song. Rub my thighs to that song.
We salute you, Captain.
I found it really interesting earlier, Liv, that you were saying about
That's happened again.
You were saying how the tracks made you think of a location.
Yeah.
Which is what Jack was saying at the start was one of his main aims was to think of songs like places. And I think it's...
Where does this remind you of?
Jack, mate, your
I
audio.
knew what Jack just said.
What?
Jack stiffed out.
Take a picture.
Jack, you sound like a track on the second half.
I didn't hear a word of what you were going on.
It's like little fishes.
Can you hear me?
Sorry,
It's just gonna be
I've
a
lost it a
nightmare to
bit.
edit. This has been a rambly conversation.
Yeah, this is gone off the rails a bit, hasn't it?
Sorry, Jack, you're just so funny.
Oh my god. Oh my god. Jesus Christ. Dude, for that edit, this is where you all broke down.
Something so ridiculous about someone losing connection.
It's just the way it slowed your voice down so much. Especially because you'd already been quite airy about any memory of this album. And then it just goes like, yeah, was, yeah.
I also liked
you
how much
actually
you were
hear me?
laughing at the look at me. I am Eno now.
Oh, sweet merciful
Can you
Lord.
actually hear me?
Christ. Sorry. Right,
Can you hear
should we start off again at Jamie? Oh my god, Jack, turn your camera off. I can't, no one can hear you.
I can't wait to play on the backup. My backup recording will be recording this Discord conversation, so I can find that exact noise Jack is making. It's so horrible.
And his display picture that comes on when he taps that.
Right.
Hello, Jack. Hi,
Oh
that's
God,
better.
I'm dead. I'm done, man. I'm dead.
It's tapped out.
Right, Jamie, what was it you wanted to talk about?
I don't know whether it matters anymore.
It was about where the album puts you.
Yeah,
Places.
that was a good point. Let's go back to that.
Can you roll that back?
I can't remember which track you were talking about now, Liv. It might have been The Big Ship.
Yeah. Oh, Christ. Oh, dear.
Thanks.
Yes, end of combo.
Big yes from Liv. How would
Yes.
Jamie respond?
Sorry, I thought you were going to draw more on what
Jamie
you
was going to say something.
Yeah, so did I.
I didn't realise that was Jamie handing Liv the reins.
Alright, enough. I'm gonna take the reins. I'm taking the reins.
Sorry.
He's the captain now.
I'm taking the reins now. I am the captain now.
Look at Jack.
Right. So, where does this album take you, Jamie?
I don't know.
Okay, I've got an interesting point about being taken places. All of my points have literally just been what I've read online, but I read a good quote that I really
Liv hasn't
agree
even
with.
listened to the album.
I read a good quote, and I'm not like even referencing but where it's coming from properly. My mysterious like haven of quotes I'm just pulling out of my ass for the album.
Liv, have you given us any of your opinions on this?
Oh, sorry. Okay. Well, basically, I read that what Brian Eno does is he.
Coughing into your microphone. I've got to edit this.
I can't speak. I'm sorry. Okay. What Brian Eno does with the album is I think the songs take you on a journey and they transport you to places. So like The Big Ship, although it's called The Big Ship, I just imagine myself in a forest for some reason.
Stop laughing, Louis. Stop it. This podcast will never end.
I'm so sorry. Yeah.
Jamie, they're ruining your podcast.
It's alright. It's okay.
I know it's called The Big Ship, but I had to think of it. I'm crying. I'm actually crying.
Oh my god.
This track doesn't give me shit vibes. It gives
Oh
me
my god.
big forest vibes.
So am I. I'm so so sorry. Okay. So, what it does really well is it takes you on a journey, but then the journey where you end up is where you started, if that makes sense. So basically, that's what.
Are we just going to ignore that? Are we going to ignore that as if that makes any sense?
Just cut it all. You're gonna have to do some good editing.
Louis, can you save all of these bits?
Yeah, I'll
please?
find somewhere to get the raw version. The HD
That can be on our Patreon when we make one.
Do you want a shittier version that you
Yeah.
already get for free? Please pay for it. Oh, sorry.
All art is white.
We go around in a circle and make a noise that sums it up. Jamie, sum up this album in a noise. Jack, sum up in a noise.
Bloop.
Liv. Mine is. That was my impression of Robert Fripp's solo once and almost fired.
This is a rather silly podcast.
It's a silly place.
This is
Can't believe we were talking about how we're going to make
wonderful.
money from this
Quite,
podcast just yesterday.
quite haywire.
Guys, I know what we can call this podcast, this episode.
What?
Is this going?
Another silly
Is this
world.
going?
Good one. Oh, I can't wait to listen back to this and just hear me cry. Me and Liv just 100% lost it. They're like audible tears on the
my
microphones.
Yeah.
I reckon you've got about 20 minutes of actual conversation.
Oh my god.
I
feel so
Nah, we
bad.
I did keep saying that we need to make these a little bit shorter. I didn't mean tank the episodes from the inside.
we went on for a bit.
I feel bad, but I
Should
feel
I
like when
give
we
a shout
actually
out
chatted
to-
about the album, it was good.
Yeah.
We did.
We just
we
it
did
just
chat
got a
for
bit
a
late,
decent
and
chunk.
all of our one beers went to our heads.